The studio lights burned hotter than usual that night, the kind of heat you feel on your skin and in your chest at the same time. Millions of screens flickered across the country, and in living rooms, dorms, and late-night diners, people leaned a little closer without even realizing why. Something was about to snap. You could sense it in the pauses, in the tight smiles, in the way silence suddenly became louder than words. This wasn't just another political debate. This was the moment where calm masks crack, and the world watches to see what spills out. Tim Walz sat upright, hands folded, wearing the practiced composure of a man who had faced storms before. He told himself he'd been through worse. Town halls filled with anger. Campaign trails soaked in criticism. Endless headlines twisting every word. He reminded himself of classrooms he once taught in, of students who had looked to him for patience and fairness. He came onto the show believing he could explain, clarify, rise above the noise. But live television has a way of stripping people down to their nerves, and tonight, the script was already slipping out of his control. Across from him, Greg Gutfeld leaned back with that familiar half-smile, casual, sharp, waiting. He wasn't loud yet. He didn't need to be. The audience knew the look. It was the calm before a verbal storm. Somewhere off stage, producers watched heart rate monitors of the show itself, ratings climbing, social media buzzing, hashtags warming up like engines. And then, like a sudden gust through an open door, Donald Trump's words entered the conversation, archived clips, past statements, receipts pulled up in real time. Not shouted, not exaggerated, just placed on the table, one by one. At first, Tim tried to respond the way he always had. He spoke of context, of nuance, of how leadership decisions are never as simple as sound bites. His voice was steady, but something underneath it trembled. Greg pressed gently at first, then more precisely, threading questions together so tightly that any loose answer tugged the whole fabric. The clips rolled again. The studio audience murmured. Online, comment sections began to flood, some defending, some attacking, all watching. Then came the moment. That split second where restraint meets humiliation and loses. Tim's jaw tightened. His shoulders stiffened. The polite cadence vanished. He leaned forward, eyes sharp, voice rising not in volume but in intensity. Years of bottled frustration spilled out, not just about this interview, but about being misunderstood, reduced, labeled. He spoke of public service, of sacrifice, of nights he'd lain awake questioning every decision he'd ever made. The eruption wasn't rage alone, it was exhaustion finally finding a microphone. Greg didn't interrupt. That surprised everyone. He simply listened, nodding slightly, letting the eruption run its course. Because sometimes the most devastating move isn't to attack, it's to allow someone to reveal themselves fully. When Tim finished, the room felt different. Quieter. Heavier. As if everyone had just witnessed something deeply human rather than purely political. And then Trump's words echoed again, not as a taunt but as a mirror. The contrast was stark. Confidence versus defensiveness. Certainty versus explanation. It wasn't about who was right in that moment, it was about who looked unshaken under the lights. Tim realized it too. You could see it in the brief flicker of his eyes, the pause where he inhaled and recalibrated. This was the challenge he hadn't prepared for, the challenge of being exposed not as evil or incompetent, but as vulnerable. The rest of the show unfolded more slowly. Tim regained some composure, choosing his words with care. Greg softened his tone, shifting from confrontation to reflection. They spoke about leadership under pressure, about the cost of public life, about how easy it is for a nation to turn disagreement into dehumanization. The audience wasn't cheering or booing now. They were listening. When the cameras finally cut, the internet exploded. Clips went viral within minutes. Some people mocked the eruption, calling it a meltdown. Others saw something else entirely, a man pushed to his breaking point by a system that never stops judging. Comment sections turned into battlegrounds of empathy versus triumph. "This is why leaders crack," one comment read. "This is why honesty matters," said another. Subscriptions climbed. Notifications rang non-stop. But the real impact came later, in quieter moments. Tim, alone that night, replayed the interview not to punish himself but to understand it. He realized that strength isn't the absence of emotion, it's the ability to face it without letting it consume you. Greg, in his own way, reflected too, recognizing the power of restraint and the responsibility that comes with a platform. And viewers, sitting at home, saw a truth that cut through politics. Pressure reveals character, but it can also reveal humanity. The inspiring message wasn't about who won the argument. It was about what happens when masks fall on live television. About how even the most powerful figures are still people carrying doubts, pride, fear, and hope. In a world addicted to shouting, that moment reminded millions that listening can be more powerful than yelling, and that growth often begins right after a public failure. If this story made you feel something, anger, understanding, curiosity, then it did its job. Because conversations like these don't end when the screen goes dark. They continue in comments, in debates, in the choice to stay engaged rather than look away. And sometimes, the most explosive moments are the ones that force us to reflect, connect, and demand better, from leaders, from media, and from ourselves.